Beck, and with Charlie Waltgren. We are taping Catherine Lyons today. It's Thursday, January the 5th, 2006. And we're going to start talking about the formation of the Blanco Woman's Club, because Catherine was a charter member, or is a charter member of that group. And can you tell me whose idea was it to start the Women's Club?
There was a woman who moved to Blanco who was a speech therapist. And I cannot remember her name because shortly after that she left. But she had the idea of having a speech class. And I don't know who she talked to, but someone got the elite of Blanco gathered in the Christ home, which was, at that time, was where the post office is now.
Yes.
And they met there and discussed having a speech club, speech class, and decided they'd much rather have a women's club. So that's when the women's club was organized.
Do you know approximately when that was?
It was in 1937.
37, okay.
And
besides Mrs. Christ, who were some of the people who were there at that meeting?
As I say, the elite of Blanco was invited. The Chris and the Cages and the Lindemans and the Brighams and well, those are the primary ones.
Right.
And I'll have to add, and this may be something you want to delete, they decided that they would not invite anyone that lived west of Blanco because they weren't. It was a snobbish group. There's no question about that. And shortly after that first meeting, they had their first club meeting. And they set the meeting date for being the second Wednesday of the month.
Yes.
Yes, it still is. And they elected Mrs. Christ as the first lady of Blanco, as the first president. And they decided at that time that Blanco had a lot of new people move in. And they decided at that time that one of the old members of the community would be the president. And then the second year, a new member, a new resident would be. So on the second year, my mother was elected president.
Oh, great. And her name was?
Maud Chick.
Maud Chick.
Maud Chick. And after the club had been meeting for some time, I must tell you, though, that one of the rules was the women always wore their hats.
Yes.
And they always carried their gloves.
Yes.
And they always had a very elegant tea hour following the business meeting. And after the club had been in existence for some time, my mother, Maud Chick, and Jane Dale decided that Blanco should have a library. So they got busy and gathered a few books, and they put them on the drugstore shelf because Robert Fulcher had just moved to Blanco with his bride and had opened a drugstore. And he was purchasing his supplies by 1 dozen at a time, a twelfth of a dozen at a time.
Right.
And he had a lot of shelf space. So those few books are put on the library, on the drugstore shelf. And the library seemed to catch on. And the first thing you know, they had to have different quarters for it. And they moved it over to the publisher's office. And at that time, Jane Dale was the publisher of the paper.
Right.
And so it kind of switched around until they finally found good space for it. Well, the club was organized with, is it 5 or 6 departments?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 departments.
And each department was expected to, during the month, the chairman of that department was supposed to gather her department together and they were supposed to study. And that kind of died of boring. I went to one, I remember, and that was as far as it went. But the gardening department seemed to attach more importance to it, and there was more involved in it. And out of that came the library, the garden club, the Yucca Garden Club.
Oh, okay, so it grew
Out of the woman,
woman's
it
club.
did come out of the woman's
Was
club.
there any national affiliation? Because there are women's clubs in different places, but I've never heard that
No.
there was a connection.
There was no connection, and there was no connection with the gardening either. But in that garden club, it was very active, and every year they had a beautiful flower show.
Ah,
I remember one year, Roberta, what was her name? Anyway, she decided she wanted to present a garden. So she at that time was living where the Mole Ranch is now. And she went in and she shaved all of the grass out of her yard and took it to Blanco and spread it out in this garden in Blanco.
ah,
And she had a beautiful display there. And those flower shows were something. And they were tried and tested and judged. The garden club, I think now, has kind of deteriorated into a social club. But at that time, it was a working club.
working club.
And you knew how to plant and how to fertilize and when to plant. And
Almost like the Master Gardeners is now.
exactly.
Yes, and I know that because my Aunt Ruth got very active in that. Aunt Ruth Byers got very active in
She
that,
was.
and that's where she ended up starting her own
Being a
business.
florist, yeah.
Yeah, being a florist. Yeah. So you've answered a lot of the questions that I have down here. You said that they have 6 departments, which are the art, the civic, the garden, the legislative, literature, music. Did they have a reason for choosing those 6? Because there's a blend of like civic and legislative, and then other things like fine arts, and
I
music.
think that they were just ones that they thought were important.
Yes. And so they had programs just like the Women's Club does now.
Every month, one of the departments would have a program. And then every year, one of the departments would put on a special event. And that rotated among the departments.
Right. And so that was their own original ideas. That didn't come from any other,
No.
Yes, that's very interesting. Yeah. So what are some of the, other than the flower shows and the garden shows, what are some of the other very interesting programs that you can remember?
Well, I want to tell you about the first art exhibit they had.
Okay.
I think that was given the month after they were organized.
Oh, my goodness.
And it was about the most elegant thing I have ever attended. It was held in the old courthouse. And all of the members were in long formal dresses.
Oh, my.
And all of the men were in suits. And there was a gorgeous tea that was served in the middle of it. This was at night. And they had an outstanding display of art because Max Krieger, who was a wealthy man, had made several trips to Europe and had bought art in Europe. And all of that art was at our disposal. So hanging on those walls were gorgeous paintings, beautifully displayed. And then this elegant tea table with linens and the linen napkins and silver tea service. And that was when I met Angelin Fulcher.
Oh,
They had just come to Blanco. And she was pretty and light-haired, red-headed, and had on a green dress and was just full of vigor and vitality.
Right. Yes, and she was one of the she was one of the early members.
That's right.
One of the charter members. Yes, and so all of the work, all of the art belonged to Max Kruger. Was he?
Not all of it, no.
Not all of it. Some of
As
it.
a matter of fact, some of our art was up there.
Okay.
And some of the other art was up there. But Max Kruger was the one that put the wonderful art in for us.
Right. That was a very elegant thing.
It was.
Yeah, did they charge for this, or was this just an open?
This was the purpose of the Women's Club. Now, this is something I should have told you. The whole basic purpose of the Women's Club was to bring culture to Blanco. And that night they brought culture to Blanco.
Yes, they did. Yes, I should say. Yes, I remember as a little girl being taken to Women's Club meetings with my Aunt Letha and Aunt Ruth, and they were like musical programs. Can you think of a musical program that was really outstanding? I know I went to one up at the Singletons on the hill, the Singleton family on the hill, because they brought in well-known artists.
Yes, they did.
And
they did.
and musicians, from very very reputable reputations.
They weren't fooling around about being little country stuff.
Right.
Their purpose was to bring culture And that was in there, that word was used to bring culture to Blanco. And that's what they were doing.
Right, right, right. Yes, and they have. And the library. Think about how the library has grown.
Yes, it's almost unbelievable to start out with maybe half a dozen books on the drugstore shelf to what we have now.
I can remember when it was in that surplus military building thing that they had, barracks building, next
Yes.
to City Hall, West City Hall now.
Well, when they finally decided they had to have their own building, they bought that barracks thing
Right.
and moved it back behind the City Hall. And one of the newcomers in Blanco was Mrs. Jack Forsyth, and she took it over. And I don't know whether she was a librarian or not, but she made that a very attractive place.
Yes.
And when you went in, you enjoyed roaming around among the books. And they stayed there as long as they could. And Mary Virginia took it over for a while, but Mary couldn't do it any longer. And then Jim Williams, who was an attorney and had been a county judge,
Right.
had reached the end of his life, and his wife was dead, and he was kind of bitter about that. And he figured he was going to die, and he wanted to do something for the library. So he talked to Mary Virginia about it, and he said, now, I will give you $10,000 in cash, or I will give you my home. Now, which one you want? And Mary V said, I'll take the home. So she took the home, and of course, that was the smart thing to do.
Right.
Because they got more out of it than
Right,
$10,000.
$10,000, right.
And that's why the library is called the Jim and Evelyn Williams
Yes,
Library.
Yes. I spent some happy hours in their house on Cox Road when they lived out on Cox Road. Remember when they lived on Cox Road? Yeah, they lived out on the ranch road for a while before they moved into town.
Well, I just knew them when they lived into town.
They had an exchange student from Germany, and they had me over to their house when I was still in high school because he was trying to learn English, and so that's how I got to know them. So they were very influential. Was she a member of the Women's Club?
No, she was not.
Yeah. Okay. So that was a major influence on the development of the library, though.
That's
that
right.
endowment.
And Jim Williams, I'll have to tell you, he was quite a character. He belonged to the Methodist Church. And church is supposed to be out at 12 o'clock. And when 12 o'clock came, he got up and walked out. Not in the middle of a sermon or anything else. At 12 o'clock, the church was over.
For him.
And he did it several Sundays.
Okay. Yeah.
Then after, finally, Mrs. Hawk took the library over, and I think she was a librarian.
She was my second grade teacher, so I remember her quite well.
And then eventually they bought the building where the post office used to be and
Yes.
where the publisher,
The newspaper is
now. And for a long time they were in there. And I really think that the one who did more to develop the library than anybody else was Paige. Oh, you know who I mean. And she's such a dear friend of mine, I'm just crazy about her.
We're trying to hear.
Payne!
Who?
Payne.
Payne.
Sylvia Payne.
Yeah, Sandra Payne.
Sandra Payne.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
And she drove everybody unmercifully. But she got things done.
Yes. She drove herself mainly.
Yes, she did.
Yes, she worked full-time there.
And she got more money donated to the library until we could afford to build the building that we built.
Right, right. Which was dedicated on April the 27th, 2000. And here it is, 2006, and we've all just about outgrown that library, which is how fast it's growing.
One other thing about the library is that Pat Riley gave us that building. There was an old barbecue stand, restaurant
Yes.
that had been built. And it went under, or it didn't
Yeah.
succeed. And
Yeah.
the building belonged to Pat Riley.
Yeah, Pat Ryan.
Ryan.
Yes.
And she
It's very
thought
generous.
long and hard about it. But she gave it to the Women's Club. And that was a basis for the building that we finally could afford.
Right. Right, that was a major step. Where was the Williams home in town? I don't remember where it was in town.
It was all on those dead-end streets, and whether it was 9th or 10th, somewhere in there. And it was the last house on the street.
So the library was in their house?
No.
No, they gave their house to the library.
To the library.
It was willed to the library, and it
And then the
became
library eventually sold it.
financial foundation of the library, which the endowment, it operates off of the interest on that money that was put in the bank as an endowment fund. So that's critical for, that was a critical step for the Women's Club to achieve that, because any nonprofit group really cannot operate well unless they have a solid endowment. And that's what happened for the library. Think back about some of the times when you served as hostess, and maybe perhaps with your mother, you served as hostess for the Women's Club?
Well, after the club had been in existence for a few months, then it came to be springtime, May. And they decided that they would have their May meeting would be a luncheon.
Oh, okay.
And it was held at the ranch, right over there at the ranch house. And one day we were going through the Kodak album, and there was a picture that had been taken that day. And that has been printed, and I think there's a picture of it. I think it's an enlargement hanging in the library now.
Did you ever identify all of the people that were in that picture?
Never did.
Right.
And I have wished that we had a yearbook from that year.
Yes.
Mother had it. Mother had yearbooks from every year, but she gave them to the library.
Oh.
And at one time, we had papers that, well, what are we going to do with them?
Right.
And my brother built a box, a big box, and to store them in. And that was just fine until after so many years have passed and so many papers have been developed that it's overflowing, and I don't know what's happened to it now.
We'll have to find that, because that's critical. It should be in the library somewhere.
It should be. And as a matter of fact, it had a lock on it, and the key was lost. Now, whether the key was ever found or not, I don't know what the outcome of that was.
Well, a locksmith could still get in it, though.
But Mother did turn all of those old yearbooks over to the club.
Okay. So that's a valuable resource. What was served that day at the luncheon? That was the first May luncheon, then, you're talking about?
Yes,
And that was here at the ranch?
Here at the ranch. And at that time, my son was about 5 or 6. And he had a little fox terrier. And Nikki attended the luncheon too. And he's in the picture.
There was quite a number of people that were here.
Well, the membership was limited for one reason. We were going to meet in the homes.
Oh, okay.
And we had to limit it to how many people could be.
And that was the only reason that it was limited?
That's right. And I think there's been some discussion about it and making it larger. But they don't always meet in the homes. They usually don't meet in the homes.
Right. Well, it's gotten quite large, a lot of ways. So there were members, and were there guests at that first luncheon, or just members?
I can't give you an honest answer, but I imagine there were guests as well.
Okay, because we invite guests now. Now.
And of course, it was imperative that if you had a guest, that you must notify the hostess ahead of time.
Right.
And also, if you can't be present, you notify the hostess ahead of time. We didn't do things crudely.
Right. Still don't do things crudely. Oh, that's the fun part of being it. What are some other programs or things that you can remember that were kind of high points, or people? Tell us about the people you remember being in it. You talked about Angela Fulcher.
Yes, Angela.
Myrtle Carter.
Myrtle Carter, she was very active, and she was a musician.
Yes.
And she was very active in the club.
Yes. Two sweethearts of mine.
Oh, really?
Yes, absolutely. Angela Fulcher, I had tap dance lessons from her when I was 3 years old.
Yes, I remember she came and she was teaching dancing.
Yes, she was teaching dancing, and I can remember dancing on the stage in the old building, what they call the Alamo building, or the Spanish-style building we're trying to restore now. And Myrtle Carter, I remember, because any event we had at school, she was always picking kids to sing. And I had a fairly good voice, and so I was one of her prime kids that she, all the way through from about sixth, 7th grade on, on the stage constantly, singing for different programs around in town, sang for the Women's Club several times.
We made use of every talent that anybody ever had.
Yes, so I've been coming to Women's Club meetings since I've been about probably about 10 or 12 years old. So anyway, so I know them, and I know they brought a lot to the Women's Club because of their talents and their skills.
Everybody that had any talent at all, it was used, and it was well used.
Yes. Can you think of someone else who was very talented, even though it was just maybe a leadership skill? Who were the real leaders in the club who really made it work? Because this is a new group back in 1937, 38. Who made it really go?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if Mother wasn't the one, the
I'm sure she
primary
was.
example. She is the one that recommended that the collect be included in the program and in the yearbook.
Did she write it?
No, it was from a club in San Antonio.
Oh, okay.
And she thought it was so apropos
Yes, it is.
that she suggested it be put in, and it was.
Good.
And of course, Mother was a strong woman.
Yes.
And we have had weak presidents, and we have had very strong presidents. I remember Mary V. was president one time, and then the next time they wanted me to serve, I said, no, you're not going to put me up there and then compare. Because my way of doing things was
Totally different, right.
So after a few years had passed, we had a particularly weak president, and the club just was falling apart. And I went to the nominating committee. I said, if you want me to be president, I will accept. And so I accepted that year, and I think we got the club back on its feet again.
Yes. Evidently, it's had enough strong leaders that really has developed it
Carried
as
it on
a...
through. And I want to give a little plug right here to Vicki Pounce. She's president now, and I think she's an outstanding president.
Yes, she is.
And she's one that brought I'm All the Night Visitors to Blanco.
Yes, that was the wonderful program.
You got to see that?
Yes, it was great. Yes.
And that's the sort of thing that the Women's Club has tried to do.
Right.
And some of the presidents have carried on. And some of them haven't quite caught the...
Yeah, and see, what I like about, and I have to be, the programs, the community programs that I've enjoyed the most are the cultural ones. Like the art show that we had at the library was just excellent. And, and then we've had other programs that to me are important, but they were not as much as culture, as not cultural things. And like you say, from the very beginning, the emphasis for the Women's Club was on culture, bringing culture to Blanco.
Definitely, it was. There's one musical program that I remember, but that may be just because it's my own personal liking, and that was at the Pouts home. And Vicki was playing the piano, and Sherry Stockman, and
Probably,
she used to be the music director at the Blanco Church, Methodist Church.
Elizabeth
Hodges sang,
Yes.
and one number that they sang was from La Boheme. And it just...
Yes, I know. It makes chill bumps.
Got goosebumps all over me about it.
Right.
Because I just love that opera.
Yes.
And that was an outstanding program because they both had good voices.
Right.
And of course the pianist was excellent.
Right, excellent. Yes, very good. Very good. Well, that to me was growing up and going as a guest, or someone who was maybe performing in a small way was what the Women's Club to me was about. And then the added bonus was their work with the library, because there's not very many clubs, civic clubs that will actually take on a task which is day to day, year to year, like the library. And that's been extremely important for the community of Blanco.
I think it's been just outstanding. I really do.
Yes, and for really being the main supporter, of a public library the way they have.
The Women's Club was formed for a purpose, and it's been doing it and going on with that for a long time. And still doing it.
Yes, because I can remember as a little girl coming to those shelves in the drugstore and my mother looking for books. You know, and there were always, from the very beginning, there were a few children's books there that we checked out and took home and I read, and I learned to read before I ever hit first grade, which is a good thing because I had 6 first grade teachers. When Thelma got a hold of us, we all had to start all over again. But anyway, you know, it's been a major influence on the lives of a lot of different community members, which it still is, and it's a very important thing. So that, you know, to me, it's the history of the Women's Club is really tied up in not only the cultural events and for the well-being of 35 members and guests, but also the community with the library.
One thing that has rather disturbed me about the club recently, in the last few years, is I wonder if when a new member is taken in, if the membership chairman informs her of the responsibilities of a membership. Because when you are a member of the club, you have to be in one of the departments, which means you have to take part in one of the programs, one program during the year, and then every 6 years you had to put on that special event.
Right.
And they just seem to, well, you know, you belong to the women's club, and then you drop out if you want to, and go on the associate list, and the associate list keeps getting longer and longer and longer and longer. And it seems to me that they are, cheapening isn't the word I want, but
Kind of diluting.
that's it. The women's club.
That is a concern. I can see that would be a concern. Yeah.
Now, when I realized I can no longer do anything for them, I resigned. I wanted to resign, and they accepted me. They accepted me not as an associate member, as something special. I don't know what it was, but anyway, I
Right.
was willing to go on the associate list because
Right.
I knew I was going to go when I could.
Yeah, you are a member at large emeritus or something like that. Right.
And I knew I was going to go when I could,
Uh-huh.
and I was going to retain my interest in the club.
Right.
But it wasn't just drift in and drift
Right.
out.
Right. Yes, that's a very important thing.
And there are a lot of people on that associate list who don't come and have no intention of ever coming. And I don't know why they want their name to be on that list.
Yeah. Yeah. I could see that would be a concern if you've been a very active person as you have been. Yeah. And you worked at the bank, is that right?
When my husband died, I got the job as the president's secretary.
Oh, okay.
So I was Percy Brigham's secretary.
Uh-huh. What year was that? Do you recall?
Oh, gosh. No.
Okay. Okay.
It was back in the late 30s or early 40s.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Okay. And so you were a member of the Women's Club before that?
Yes, I was.
Okay. Okay. So you were working as well as being an active member of the Women's
Yes,
Club.
And I had a lot of fun, a lot of experiences as secretary to the president of the bank.
Oh, I can imagine you did.
Because he was president of the bank, he was chairman of the Red Cross, he was the attorney, and I forgot what else. But anyway, all that fell in my lap.
Sure.
And he was lovely about saying, well, just give it to the lady. Give it to the lady.
He was a great man.
Yes, he was. Did you remember when the bank was robbed?
No. When did that? Oh, I kind of remember, but I don't.
Well, you remember how his desk was,
Yes.
and then the cages, and
Yes.
and Joe Buckner was in the cage.
Yes.
Well, I wasn't there. It happened before I went to work for them, thank heavens. But that robber walked in and laid a gun on the counter and gave me your money.
Oh my.
And Joe Buckner handed it out. And the robber walked out, and Joe Buckner came out. We've been robbed. Mr. Brigham says, we have? Well, when? What happened? Walked right past Mr. Brigham's desk.
Oh. Yeah. So what happened? He just got away, huh?
I think they called him up by Johnson City.
Ah.
If I'm not mistaken. I don't
Okay.
remember for sure.
Right. Right. But that was before you went to work
Yes,
there.
That was
Yeah.
just one of the tales that was given to me.
Right. Right on. Yeah. So back to the Women's Club. So they always dressed in their hats and always carried their gloves.
Definitely.
And I remember as a little girl having to wear a hat and bring gloves. when I came.
One day in Mary, Virginia, and Mother came over. They were going to pick me up and take me. And
Uh-huh.
I walked out, and Mother looked at me, and she said, where is your hat? So you know what I did? I came in and got my hat.
Well, women wore hats to church, and for every formal occasion
That's
they
right.
wore hats, and so that was a sign of how important this club was.
That's right.
That you
That's
would
right.
dress in your very best clothes
That's
to
right.
come to this club meeting.
That's right, exactly.
Yes, and you would, and of course all dignified women wore gloves.
That's right.
And so yeah.
And I wish that they still did, to hide.
Yeah.
And my sister was the first one, I think, that ever wore trousers to
Oh,
the
is that
women's
right?
club. And how she got by with Mother, I don't know.
I can see that would be a real difference.
Uh-huh.
Yes. Yes. And your mother didn't make a big to-do about that, huh? If she did.
Well, I don't know. That happened over there.
Right.
And I was over here.
If you did, it didn't make any difference. Virginia still wore trousers. Yeah. Yeah. When did they quit wearing hats?
Just gradually.
Uh-huh.
Just gradually.
Because people quit wearing hats to church. I used to, when I was a young one, we all wore hats to church,
And I wish we still did.
It was much more formal. Because I like hats. Now we
Well,
don't wear hats.
when you have a hat on, you feel like you're dressed.
Yes. And so that's a different cultural thing. What else has been different? One of the things you pointed out was that the size of the numbers of members was limited to
35.
35 so that they would fit in people's homes. So that was another change, which, we still have 35, but we don't always have the program at home.
No, we don't.
Yes. And so, is there any other really significant changes that you can think of from the first days to now? You've already talked about maybe the quality of the members themselves, about being involved in programs and things.
Well, that's the thing that really bothers me.
Right.
Is people coming into the club and not appreciating.
Well, maybe it's because they really don't understand the purpose of the women's club.
Well, and that's part of where the management of the women's club has fallen down, because the membership chairman is required by the bylaws to do that.
Yes. To really educate people.
Anytime any name is put up, the membership chairman has to go and visit that person and discuss with them what membership in the women's club.
See, that's not done anymore. That's not done.
But it was
No.
done.
Because now it's just a matter of recommendation, and that's by two other members.
And at one time, they finally had to announce, don't ever announce the election of a member as unanimous. She was elected. Because if it wasn't unanimous, we don't care to have it published if there was a vote against her.
Oh, okay.
And at one time, there was one name put up, and it was discussed among the members, just don't ever present her name because she'll be voted down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if that ever happened to anybody else, I don't know of it, but it did happen to her.
Yeah. And so there was a certain kind of, what shall I say?
There was a criteria.
Yes, a criteria
And
which
they
people
had
had
to
to
stand
meet.
up to it or they didn't get into the club.
Yeah. And I'm sure that's not as closely adhered to now as it was in the past. And perhaps it's because we have so many new people moving in that it's difficult for people, to
Yes,
really
you can
know
hardly
everyone.
find the old. My husband used to laugh. You know that expression, the FFVs?
Yes.
Well, he used to laugh and call them the FFBs. Because there was definitely a group of first families.
Yes.
And you can't find them among the rest of them now.
No. That's true in every community, though. When we lived in Greenville, Tennessee, they were called the 400. And some of them didn't speak to each other, but when someone died, they all showed up for the funeral.
That's right.
And it was quite interesting to see how sociologically that change is happening in Blanco now to a certain extent. Because a lot of our people have not lived in Blanco. What I'm talking about, current membership, have not lived in Blanco, but maybe a year, 2 years, or something like that.
When Mother and Dad first bought this ranch up here, people said, well, you'll never be accepted. because the Germans up here just simply won't accept you.
Oh,
But I don't know why.
yeah,
As a matter of fact, Dad was called Opa.
yeah,
All of our neighbors just called him Opa,
Uh-huh.
Opa Chick.
yes,
And he visited with them, and it was just a nice, great big club of people living down here in the valley.
right, mm-hmm,
And we never felt any of that. But I could see it in other places. And I don't know why. I don't know what made it.
Well, a lot of it was probably your parents' attitude when they moved in here, too. You know. that
Well,
they
I'll tell
came-
you how I feel about it, Shirley. I feel like that Mother and Dad moved in here, and they made a place for us
Yes,
that I occupy because of them. I didn't earn it myself. And my grandchildren, the same thing is true. And I think we have the obligation to uphold that reputation. And that may be real stuffy of me, but I do.
no, because that is true. If you're the community is there, the community forces are there, and when a newcomer moves in, you have to accept the fact that you're going to be new. But your attitude towards being new, if your parents had come in and they'd been very critical, your mother would have never been the second president of the Women's Club.
That's right.
She would have never been invited to even be in the Women's Club.
That's true.
But so her
We'd
own
have been on the west
attitude-
side of town.
Right. The attitude that they came in with is probably what established them as community members. They were open to people
Well,
and
and
friendly.
I feel an obligation to it. And when some of my progeny get out of hand, I remind them of it.
Yes.
Well, I do. I think
Yes.
it's only right.
Yes.
If they're going to accept the benefit of it, then they have an obligation to uphold it.
Right. I wish all citizens in Blanco felt that way. It would be great if they did.
Well, I didn't raise them all.
No.